All right, so, we've been getting a lot of requests about this whole life expectancy thing. And honestly, when I first saw the research, I was like, wait, really? Globally, things are looking up, right? We've got all these medical advancements and stuff.
It's a strange one, isn't it? Because, yeah, globally we are seeing people live longer, but then you look at men, specifically in developed countries, and there's this downward trend. And it's not like a little blip. It's significant. And we're talking guys, what, between 20 and 60, right?
Yeah, like these aren't folks at the end of their life,
No.
These are guys like us in their prime. And that's what the article really hammered home. They called it this whole death of despair trend. It's kind of a punch in the gut, honestly.
It's a powerful term and unfortunately pretty accurate. It's less about us battling, infectious diseases these days
Yeah.
and more about, well, suicide rates, drug overdoses, alcohol-related deaths, stuff that's less about physical health and more about, I don't know, this sense of hopelessness almost.
So it's not just how we're dying, but like the why that's shifted. The article called it a disconnection epidemic, which honestly, I don't know, it just sounds kind of vague. What's that all about?
Well, think about it this way. The traditional roles men had, breadwinner, head of the household, even just like the sense of community that came with those more physical labor type jobs. A lot of that has changed. And I mean, change isn't bad, progress is important. But for some guys, it's left this gap.
So it's less man up and fix it and more like, where do I even fit in now?
Mm.
Almost like we traded purpose for convenience and got a whole lot of lonely as a side effect.
Yeah, it's complicated, but that isolation is definitely a huge part of it. Take the opioid crisis, right? That's not just about physical pain. It's men in particular numbing out, not dealing with the tough stuff.
The article called it slow motion suicide, which, I don't know, man, that one really stuck with me. Because it feels like that isolation, it just snowballs into everything else. Like our grandfathers maybe had it rough in different ways, but they were in it together. Farming, factory work, whatever.
Hmm.
Hard times, but shared. And now, well, we've got convenience, but at what cost?
It's true, isn't it? It's like we've solved these big problems, but the individual stuff, it hits different? And the article, they brought up this whole other layer to it.
Yeah.
Technology.
Yeah, it's funny, right? You say technology and everyone thinks teenagers glued to their phones.
Yeah.
But this article, they were clear. It's not just kids, it's everyone.
Oh, absolutely. It's like this weird leveler. Because for guys already feeling kind of lost, with the changing roles and all that, social media,
Yeah.
it's almost like it makes it worse?
Because it's constant comparison, right? Like my dad might have compared his car to the neighbors, but now it's everything. Your house, your job, your freaking lunch.
Yeah.
All right there in your pocket 24/7.
And it's not even real. It's like everyone else's highlight reel, and you're comparing yourself to that constantly. No wonder it messes with your head. And the article, to be fair, it wasn't saying social media is evil or
Okay.
anything. It was more like it just amplifies what's already there?
It's like that saying, don't compare your behind the scenes to someone else's highlight reel. But that's basically all social media is, right?
Hmm.
And it
Yeah.
never ends. The notifications, the news feed.
Yeah.
It's exhausting.
Yeah, it creates this constant low-level anxiety. You always feel like you need to be plugged in. And that takes a toll, not just mentally, but physically too. The article had a whole section on how our bodies just weren't meant for this, this whole modern sedentary life.
Oh, yeah, like how a few generations back, just living your average day was like running a marathon by today's standards.
Right. Like, can you imagine an office worker chasing down their dinner? We evolved to move, to be challenged. And without that, our bodies and minds, they just don't work as well. It's like we're fighting against our own biology.
So we traded the spear for a smartphone, and it's messing us up on like a primal level. That's kind of wild when you think about it.
It is. And that whole quick fix thing we were talking about earlier, our own brains are wired to seek that out. And that's where dopamine comes in. Remember the article talked about that?
Dopamine. Yeah, isn't that the feel-good chemical or something, the one everyone's always chasing?
Kind of. It's not so much about being happy, but more about motivation, like seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. The problem is we're drowning in things that hijack that system. Social media, junk food, video games, they all spike your dopamine, which feels great in the moment. But then comes the crash, and it just leaves you feeling worse than before.
And then those crashes just keep getting worse, right?
Right.
Like that's where the alcohol and drugs come in.
Yeah.
I know the article talked about how they mess with your dopamine even more.
It's like it sends the whole system haywire because you get this huge dopamine rush, a massive high, but then the crash is brutal. And it's not just physical either.
It's like it feeds into all that other stuff, right? The
Sure.
hopelessness, the lack of purpose, it all just gets amplified.
Exactly. It's like a downward spiral. You feel like crap, so you reach for something to feel better, but then you just feel worse and the cycle continues. It's a tough one to break, for sure.
No kidding. And it's crazy, right? Because it's not like these substances come with like a big warning label explaining all this. In fact, it feels like the messaging, especially around something like marijuana, it's gotten way more chill.
Yeah, it's almost like we went from just say no to sure, why not, without really talking about all the stuff in between. And for parents trying to navigate this with their kids, man, it's a whole other level of complicated.
Totally. I mean, how do you even start that conversation? The article touched on it a little bit,
Yeah.
honestly. I finished that section with more questions than answers.
Yeah, there's no easy answer, that's for sure. But the biggest takeaway for me was balance is key. It's not about, you know, banning all technology or being anti-fun. It's about teaching kids to find that balance, to think for themselves, to understand that chasing those quick dopamine hits isn't a long-term solution?
It's about giving them the tools to actually deal with the tough stuff,
Yeah,
right? To find healthy ways to cope with stress and all that. Because when it comes down to it, isn't that the root of this whole thing? Like, we're all just trying to find our place in the world to feel like our lives have meaning.
exactly. We've made all this progress with technology, with convenience, but it's come at a cost. And it's not about going back to the good old days or anything. It's about figuring out what actually makes us thrive. Connection, purpose, activity, those are the things that really matter.
So it's not just about how long we live, but how we live, right?
Right.
It's about taking control, making choices that actually support our well-being. And that doesn't have to mean some huge life overhaul either. It can start small, putting down the phone, going for a walk, calling a friend. Those little things add up.
I think that's a great point to end on because at the end of the day, this is all about you, the listener. We've thrown a lot of information your way, some of it pretty heavy, but it's up to you to decide what to do with it. So here's a little something to think about. What's one small change you can make today to feel a little more connected, a little more present, a little more alive? Because those little changes, they have the power to make a big difference.